Okay, I'm going to try this again. I've recorded this a couple of times and it won't upload on my computer. So, Phylum Periphera, they are the simplest of all animals that we're going to talk about. Most animals contain tissues, organs, organ systems. Periphera have specialized cells, but they do not have tissue or any organization above tissues. So here's an example of a marine sponge. We know it's marine because it is very bright colored. You'll notice the openings there. Those are called the osculum. That is where water comes out. They are covered in pores that allow them to pull water through and then push it out through the osculum or the opening. They're in the kingdom Animalia, the subkingdom Parazoa, which means they lack tissues, and the phylum Periphera, which they are named for because of their pores. So there are some marine sponges. They come in a variety of sizes and shapes. They are the simplest of all animals. They do contain specialized cells, but they don't have any other organization level beyond cells. Most of them are marines. Are marine organisms. The saltwater sponges are brightly colored, so you can see the red one up here. The freshwater sponges are more of a dull or green color, and their size ranges anywhere from 2 meters to 2 centimeters. So the word periphera means pore bearing. These are filter feeders, so they're going to pull water through their inside to gather food. So water enters through pores, and when it comes into the inside of the sponge, and we call that area the gastrovascular cavity, it brings with it oxygen and food. So the oxygen and the food are going to be pulled out of the water, and then waste products are going to be dumped into the water so that the sponge can get rid of them. So they're filter feeders. What they feed on in the water is plankton. The osculum at the top is where all of the excess water leaves. So it pulls it in through the sides, it takes the food out of the water, and then it pushes it out through the osculum. So here shows the water flow through the sponge. The porocytes, or the pores, are the openings on the side that the water goes into. It will pull out through the osculum when it's leaving. Inside of the gastrovascular cavity, or the inside of the sponge, has specialized cells called coanocytes. And coanocytes, they're also called collar cells, help move the water and help to gather food. So on this particular sponge here, it's showing you where the osculum is. A freshwater sponge, it's a little bit smaller, and it's a little harder to see that sponge because it's not brightly colored like you see in the ocean. So characteristics, it's asymmetrical. Remember, asymmetry means that I can't cut it in any direction and go through the middle and get an equal right and left half. So they don't have a definite shape that is the same on both sides. They're sessile, which means, well, at least as adults they are, which means they can't move. So they're attached to rocks. Like most organisms that are not that mobile, their larva stage can move. And part of the reason for that is so that the offspring don't basically go and fall at the base of the parent and start competing with the parent for food sources. So they have free-swimming larva stage called diplorula, and they will swim away from the adult and go land on a surface, and then they too will become sessile. They can reproduce by fragmentation, which means that pieces break off and form a new sponge. That's also sometimes called budding, where it grows an extension that falls to the ground, and it will form a new organism. A lot of the simpler organisms that don't have tissues or organs, or have tissues but don't have organs, can regenerate like that, or can reproduce asexually. There also, that occurs in a lot of organisms that aren't that mobile. So if you look inside of it, its body cavity is hollow. It is the spongiocele is on the inside. It has 2 different layers, epidermis and endodermis. Epi means outside, endo means inside. So the outer layer is the epidermis, the inner layer is the endoderm, and in between the two is a jelly-like layer called the mesenchyme. So if you're looking inside, that's also, the sponge's seal is also called the gastrovascular cavity. It is lined with these cells called choanocytes. If you look at the choanocytes, it has a collar extension sticking into the middle of the sponge. That's why they're also referred to as collar cells. So what happens is this choanocyte has a flagella or a hair-like structure that beats back and forth, and it will pull the plankton and the oxygen into the choanocyte, and the choanocyte will pass it on to an amoebocyte that will digest it and move it throughout the body. So choanocytes line the gastrovascular cavity and they capture food. The amoebocyte then digests and distributes the food to the other cells. So choanocytes are collar cells, line the inside. Remember, they have the choanocyte is made up of a collar and a flagellum. Usually on the back side of it is where you're going to find the amoebocytes. The choanocytes have flagella, and their job is to spin and move to draw water and food inside, and then it traps plankton from the water and will pass it on to the amoebocyte. So here's another picture of the structure. Water goes in, it goes through the center, food gets pulled out and by the choanocytes, and then the waste go out through the osculum. So the second type of specialized cell are those amoebocytes, and their job is to pick up the food from the choanocyte, and they finish the digestive process that the choanocyte started. Once they have the food, then they will move through that mesenchyme, and it will go from cell to cell, and it will distribute food, and it will pick up waste products. So there's the complete sponge. There's a cross section where you can see the choanocytes. This picture here is an enlarged version that shows the pores in the choanocytes. Here's one individual one, and that's what a flagella looks like. So it has to have some type of a skeletal structure, otherwise it would collapse in the water. So it is made up of protein fibers called spongin, and it's also made up of a second type called spicules. And spicules are hard spear or star shapes. They are made either of calcium carbonate or limestone, or silica or glass. So both of these types of skeletal systems look very different. The screen over here is spongin. It forms more of a netting-like feature that holds the sponge's shape. And then these are the spicules, the silica and the limestone ones. So they are more pointed structures that are smaller in size that extend throughout. So there you go for the spicules when there are a number of them present. And so you can see it on the Venus flower basket. You can see the spicules on the outside. Sponges can regenerate. So we talked about fragmentation and budding, but they can also regenerate if they've lost a part. So they can undergo mitosis or asexual reproduction. They also reproduce asexually by budding or fragmentation, where they grow a smaller sponge on the side and it falls off to the ground and then starts to form a new adult. Sponges are hermaphrodites. They make both egg and sperms. The sperm from one sponge will not fertilize its own eggs. So it will release the eggs in the sperm at different times. The whole purpose of that is to get cross-fertilization from another sponge, and that helps to give it genetic diversity. So sponges reproduce by releasing eggs and sperm into the water from the osculum, and they cross-fertilize each other's eggs. Organisms that don't move that much, a lot of them, or they don't encounter mates that often, a lot of them are hermaphrodites, and it just gives you a better opportunity or more chances for fertilization when each individual has both egg and sperm. When it is extremely harsh conditions, they form what's called a gemmule. So right before the sponge dies, it forms a gemmule that will survive harsh weather, either hot or cold. Inside of that gemmule is food, amoebocytes, and a protective covering that's made of spicules. Once the sponge dies, it is released. It is resistant to drying out, so even if it's not that moist of conditions, it will survive. And once conditions become favorable, then it will begin to grow an adult sponge. So here are some of the classes of sponges, but I don't expect you to know these. Calcarea is marine. I'm not even going to try to say that one, or the glass sponges. You've got the Demospongia. You will not need to know the classes, but you will need to know the characteristics of the sponges. We will have a test or a small quiz, probably, a small test or a quiz next week, and then we'll move on to the next phylum. This is why you need to take good notes, because you can use the notes during the tests.